will find the smallest little space that even he, who is like, he's 3.5 and small for 3.5, and he still has trouble getting into them. And then once he's squeezed in and can't move, he goes, this is my house. And that ability to go into a little gap like that and to say, like, this is a place that is expansive and I live here, it's mine. They'll do that in our stories too. They'll find those blanks, those gaps, and they will make entire houses inside the things that we don't say in our stories.
I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is The Mother of It All, where we take on motherhood through the lens of culture and culture through the lens of motherhood.
Good morning, Miranda. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Sarah. I'm good. I'm wearing a hat.
I know, it's Hat Day in honor of our guests.
It's cold. It's cold here, so.
Is it though? Oh, it's Portland.
It's cold. Yeah.
Yeah. You're wearing like a heat hat.
Yeah.
I'm just wearing a need to shower hat that I stole from my dad.
Well, mine is a need to shower, and it's like I need to shower, and yay, it's hat. Like I need a hat anyway, so.
Double duty.
I'm happy.
A twofer. Well done.
Thanks.
Well, so we're talking about books today, and I realized that I don't know what adult books you are reading these days. We haven't been, after our summer of book club shenanigans, I haven't been up to date on your reading.
Yeah,
What do you got in your nightstand?
I want to hear yours too.
It's okay. We can
You're
focus
gonna
on
be
you for a
really
minute.
proud of me. Well, okay. So I'm very slowly still finishing that, like, mystery that is set in like basically the Bake Off, like British Bake
Oh,
Off.
the Bake Off mystery.
Yeah. So that's my falling asleep book. So the problem with that is like the kids' school starts really early, so my falling asleep book is really like I really only read like one page and I fall asleep.
But how do you do that with a mystery?
It's a cozy. It's definitely like a cozy. It's not like
is the mystery that somebody stole someone else's bench scraper or something?
No, I think it's like
Is
a
it, like, low
classic
stakes?
classic British cozy, and like so someone definitely gets murdered, but it's like most of the writing is like atmospheric. Like
it's a murder that no one talks about because it's British. It's just like kind of so you actually don't actually find out who it is or why.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's like but yeah, I'm
reading
that. But I want to tell you, let me tell you my other. So I finally started All Fours.
See, I asked you a question and then I just wanted to talk about myself. I'm such a terrible co-host.
No.
Yeah, All Fours. You're done?
No, I finally started it.
Oh, why are you here? You should be reading. You should be furiously flipping the pages.
Yeah, it's so delightful. Like I like that feeling of like I don't want to do anything else. Like I want my kids to go to bed so I can just sit down with that book.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Oh, I mean, everyone knows this already. Like I feel like I'm slightly less late to this than I was to Night Bitch, right? It took me I was like years late to Night Bitch and I'm only a few months late to All Fours, but like I think
You're getting
it's almost
better with
I'm getting better.
The over 40 women set.
Yes. It's like so I'm reading it with my neighbor.
Like at the same time?
Well,
like
we're
next
like
to each other?
it's just, I don't know. She listens to hello neighbor. So that was like external pressure to finally pick it up and be like, okay, we're gonna read this.
A book club is helpful.
It's like eerie though. I feel like that book is eerily like
no one gets murdered in it. Can I just tell you that now?
No, it's eerie.
If you're
like
confusing
how much she's in my head. You know?
Oh, because she's talking. Yeah. About
I mean, not all of it, but so much of it.
The difficulties.
Yeah.
The perimenopausal difficulties. Yeah.
And does Miranda July have to be like extremely talented at everything she does? Like, it seems unfair to have so much talent in one person. Like,
well, we've never seen her like throw a discus. I mean, I think she's just sticking with, her niche, like all of us, and avoiding all the other stuff. But she is very good at what she's good at.
Like, am I as good at anything as she is at everything she tries?
You look great in that hat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you reading?
Well, I was going to say I'm reading a British mystery. You were talking about how like cute they are, but this is not cute.
Oh.
And I don't want anybody on this call to make any faces because I don't know how this ends.
Okay,
I did watch the movie. I watched the movie, but I don't really, everything just goes in one eyeball and out the other or whatever. I do not remember what happens in this. It's Rebecca by Daphne Maurier. From in Boston, we would say Marier or something like Luigi's brother. So I don't know how to pronounce that nice, but it's the classic creepy Moors, Manderley situation. And I just can't. It's so gripping. It's so well written. It's such a great. It's kind of It reminds me of I love Kazuo Ishiguro, and it reminds me of him just that really seeing everything through this narrator who's mostly reliable, but then you start to kind of learn what their flaws are and interpret the facts through them. But also I can't remember is there murder? I always think that there's a murder in things and then I'm wrong. When I never read Jane Eyre, and when I went to see Jane Eyre, the modern movie, I just thought he murdered her. I thought he murdered Jane Eyre.
It feels
and
it should be murdery.
Yeah,
it does
the whole
feel
time
murdery.
I was like, oh, Fassbender's gonna wait till he fucking murders her. And then the movie was over and I was like, did they change it from the original? So I'm always thinking there's a murder, but I think in this book there might be one. I'm not, don't make any faces. But I'm excited. It's really good. But I have the opposite problem of you, because I guess it's actually an interesting mystery that I can't go to bed. I just read for 90 minutes every night.
Yeah, that's why I don't think I could read All Fours as my bedtime book. I have to read All Fours right after I put the kids to bed, but before David and I watch.
Oh, you
TV
have
together.
separate reading parts of the day for different purposes.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
That sounds smart. It is time to introduce our guests. They've been politely listening to our chatter in their beautiful hats
and shirts. Beautiful shirt.
And I'll just kind of set us up a little bit here. Why this conversation is so exciting to me. Other than that, I really enjoy our guests as people and talking to them about really anything. Before I became a parent, I was a teacher. I would read Roald Dahl aloud to my class with such intensity that the teacher next door often had to call and ask me to tone it down. One of my finest moments. But I've really been reading books with children since I was a child myself. I used to help out in my old kindergarten classroom to avoid having to learn how to play Foursquare or interact with other girls at recess. And I remember this one time reading, being a second grader and reading Eric Carle's Brown Bear, What Do You See? To a kindergartner and being so amazed that he could read it. And I didn't realize he'd just loved it so much and he'd read it so many times, he'd memorized it. So like many of us, I noticed that some books were better than others. And some books, like the aforementioned Brown Bear, were almost kind of otherworldly. But until I became friends with Mac Barnett, or rather until my friend Mac became a celebrated author of otherworldly children's books himself, I never thought much about what it was that made some children's books so good, even more sophisticated, it seemed, than many adult books. So I've had the privilege of hearing our guests demystify this, talk about, the excellence of Where the Wild Things Are, for example, in a way that made me never think about it the same way again. And now you don't have to be friends with one of them to get their magic. They've started a newsletter on Substack looking at picture books that breaks down and extols the form in the way that they both do, I think, so uniquely and so well. Author Mac Barnett and author and illustrator Jon Klassen are independently responsible for numerous tremendous children's books, many of them together, including the Shape series, which is now a delightful show, Shape Island on Apple Plus, which I highly recommend, and also How Does Santa Go Down the Chimney, which is a new Christmas classic. They have a whole bunch of Caldecott Awards, an impressive following of people of all ages. One of them is from Canada. The other is a fan of Canadian rappers. Welcome, Mac and Jon.
Hi. Oh, man. And over the course of this podcast, we're going to figure out which one of us is the Canadian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All we have to do is ask you to apologize to us, right?
No, it'll happen without prompt.
There it was, just in the without, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we always like to ask at the top of our guests, who's caring for your kids right now? John, you're down in LA. Where are your kids?
They are in the hands of the LAUSD system. One is in kindergarten and one is in second grade. Yeah, so that's where they are right now. Probably learning a lot.
Yeah, just soaking it up. How
Yeah,
do
yeah.
they get to school? Did you take them to school this morning or?
Yeah, we walk to school. We have this miraculous situation where we can walk them 6 minutes up the street to school, and then we walk home again after that. We had neighbors next door to us who lived there for a while, and they had a little boy, and they would split their time between LA and Munich every year. They would go 6 months, 6 months, and they would go back to Munich, and everyone in Germany would ask, "What's Los Angeles like?" And the little boy would always tell them, "We walk everywhere," and they were like, "That's not true. That's not what we've heard, and that's not what LA is." But like in this little zone where we have some sort of setup, there are whole days. I work in the garage and we walk the kids to school, so there's days where we don't get in the car. It's really sweet.
That is special.
Yeah.
If you build it, it's like anything's possible.
If I build the school and the house 6 minutes away from each other, yeah.
You build an entire neighborhood.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, these niches I think are interesting, that there are
These
like
little
definitely
pockets. Yeah.
Yeah, there are, of course, there are ways that our environment and particular spaces make it hard to be a parent, and like sometimes there's workarounds.
Yeah.
Well
That's
done.
great. That's the dream.
How about you, Mac?
My
Who's
son
caring
is in preschool, in the Cedar classroom with his
Ooh.
3 wonderful preschool teachers.
Oh, what's he? Do you think he's like cleaning right now? He loves to
He
clean.
does like to clean. He likes to clean. He likes to wipe things down.
This is a Montessori preschool.
No, he's the
He's
only
just-
one who likes to clean. It's
He's
not
a
part
Montessori
of the...
kid.
Yeah.
He's not like
It is-
folding napkins.
He is,
Oh,
but it
he
is
would
not
totally
part of
required,
the preschool practice. He just tidies up the classroom every day, but it is not something that they have encouraged. It is not something that they ask of the other children.
Yeah.
He likes to clean.
Yeah.
It is one of those things
Yeah.
where you figure like a Montessori version of Hagrid's going to find him one day wiping down something. He's like, "You're a Montessori kid." And he's like, "I am." So you've been a Montessori kid all your life. It's time to come with me. Yeah.
He's like, "Are we going on a magical train journey?" He's like, "No, we're just going to this other school across the street in Berkeley."
They're all
It's right
wiping
there.
things down over there. You're gonna love it.
It's like, here's your wooden abacus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here's your
Come.
works.
Yes, come
Your
to
works.
us.
Yeah.
That's
Yesterday
very
morning
sweet.
when we went in, it was amazing. There was just there's sort of every day there are tables set up with different activities, and it changes every day. And I'm always amazed. Like there'll just be this big bin that you can fill with water. Sometimes it's just filled with ice. Sometimes it has like plants in it and rubber dinosaurs. It always changes, and it gets me really excited. But yesterday they just had these little miniature pumpkins and some hammers and
Oh.
golf tees.
Yes.
And all the kids were just hammering golf tees into pumpkins just very, very intensely. And it was amazing. Everybody, it was so great because they were so serious about it. I had never seen, it was the most successful morning activity that had been introduced. Everybody was working so intently with such focus, and it was such a ridiculous activity. But this serious face is just, yeah.
Were they actual hammers? Like,
No.
No, that's
they were-
Waldorf. Waldorf
Yeah.
is real hammers.
yeah, we
Real
went to
hammers.
like visit a preschool for Nellie as my younger, and the like tool area had like actual hammers, and like Griffin, my older, was with us, and he just beelined over there. He was
Yeah.
like, "Can I go to this school?" I was like,
Yeah.
"I don't know if any of us are gonna go to this school."
That's some Waldorf shit.
That's a real hammer.
My nephew
Yeah.
got hit on the head with a hammer in preschool by like the kid that like you knew was gonna hit
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
on the head
Yeah.
with a hammer. Bless him. Bless
Yeah.
his heart.
Yeah.
He didn't he didn't want to hurt anyone. But and it was Waldorf, so it was a real hammer. It was
Oh my
like
God.
my
That's the
sister's
thing, right?
joke
We all
was
know.
like, why Waldorf?
If you
Yeah.
spend time with like little kids, again, like delight, but like they are going to hit each other with. If you
Yeah.
give them a real hammer,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. If
you
you give
know.
a kid a hammer,
Someone's gonna get hurt eventually.
Exactly. That's a children's book, right? Speaking of pumpkins and golf tees, I actually think this is an apt metaphor for, what adults think a good activity is for children, what a lot of adults would think to put in front of their 3-year-old versus what, people who really understand the way that young children think kind of have this more expansive view of how children interact with things. And I wanted to ask you, what, from a child's perspective, what makes a picture book great? Why do these books like Where the Wild Things Are just keep readers coming back and back and back? And yes, adults, but also obviously the most important audience is children.
When we really light up is when we kind of realize that this story couldn't be done in almost any other form. That the particular way you want to tell it is unique to the picture book. And the more it's hard to even know if you've got that before you begin to get into the process of it. Once you have an idea, so often it happens that you're like, oh, that might work. And then you get into roughing it out and it just hits a wall formally. You're like, oh, actually it doesn't work this way, or it doesn't work quite how I thought. And then you can try and untangle that. But just as often you're like, it doesn't work the way I thought. Let's just walk away. And you have to find out if the form suits it or if the form wants to go that way or not. And that's sort of the push and pull of it, is that you have an idea, but also picture books have ideas of their own about what they want to do, the kind of stories they want to tell, and the size of stories they want to tell. And I think the other thing about most people that we know who do this, not everybody, but most people that we know are interested in distillation and economy in storytelling. Mm-hmm. And they're interested in whittling it down and, getting it to those key sentences or a key premise or a visual that really hooks you, or the combination of all those things. And then also, I think as we get more into it, it doesn't happen right away, but it took me a long time anyway to realize that the distillation of it, it's not just about writing something in the simplest amount of words or simplest picture. You can do that, but what you find out is that process also leads to abstraction, and it leads to omission that is really interesting. And you get to where you're comfortable not even really understanding what it is you're saying, but you've left so much out that it's got this mystery that it leaves behind that kids are really interested in sitting in and not even solving. You're not even talking about them being like, they'll make up the last 4 words of this. You're outlining an abstraction that kids are really interested in being handed, and you don't really even know what's in there, but you've outlined something. And it's this form that can do that really, really well. And you get more and more comfortable just letting it sit there without wrecking it, without popping that bubble. And it can do that. And so I think that most people we know, yeah, you get sparks of that, where people who do this are like, and I didn't even say what it was. And you're like, yeah, exactly. And there's an excitement to that, where not every person who makes stories or tells stories has that interest. Some of them are like, they want to get exactly what it is they want to say, and they want to get there, and they're really good at it, and they've got 1,000 words to do it, or whatever it is. But most people that we know who do this have an interest in just stopping short of nailing it down completely, because that's where the real meat of it is.
Yeah, it's like so much like poetry. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
lines of which resonates with me. I mean, my favorite books to read with my kids are the ones that, I mean, we read Goodnight Moon like almost every night, and it's such a poem, and it's so beautiful. And like every single night it like takes my breath away when we say like goodnight stars, goodnight air,
Yeah.
And is there something about children as readers that kind of allows for this effect you're describing, Jon, where kind of less is more, and you can have this, these open spaces, this economy that's different than the adult reader?
I think like kids are very good. Like kids love those spaces, right? Like even physically, the way that kids inhabit the world, they will often like find little crawl spaces and nooks. My son Rafe does that. He will find like just a little space in between like a bench and the wall, and he'll squeeze himself inside it. And whenever he gets in one of these tiny spaces, he calls them his houses. And like, I love that. It's like, right, he will find the smallest little space that even he, who is like, he's 3.5 and small for 3.5, and he still has trouble getting into them. And then once he's squeezed in and can't move, He goes, this is my house. And that ability to go into a little gap like that and to say, like, this is a place that is expansive and I live here. It's mine. They'll do that in our stories too. They'll find those blanks, those gaps, and they will make entire houses inside the things that we don't say in our stories. I think that is like a habit of childhood. I think also just, if something is not said, then we're asking the reader to do work, right? Like the reading of literature is active. The reader has responsibility. The reader has jobs. The reader has to do stuff. And adults, I think, can be very reluctant to do that work. We feel put upon by the demands of a piece of literature. Kids are much less likely to be resentful or feel like they are being sort of like worked over by an artwork, or to feel stupid because they don't understand something immediately, because kids, both in terms of their daily life and what we ask of them, and then also in terms of like what their brains are doing at this age, they're very adept at finding patterns and getting sets of new rules, and they're always walking into circumstances that they don't understand and very quickly learning those rules. And that is what a challenging work of art, a challenging story does, right? It has a set of rules that should be consistent, but maybe internal only to that story. And you have to learn them. And for an adult, you can be like, oh God, there are no quotation marks in this thing. How am I supposed to figure out like when somebody's talking and when it's just the narrator, or maybe it's a thought? Why don't you just punctuate this? And kids will be like, okay, yeah, we can figure this out. Here we go.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're doing all the time.
It's so funny because I feel like adults, it's even more than that, where it's like adults have gotten into a rhythm of, at least if they don't understand what's going on, they're good at faking it to themselves. Even like when you're listening to the news on the radio in the morning or something, and they're just like, Paul Smith brought this bill to the House floor this morning, and Nancy said no to that, and then you're making toast, and you're like, what, Nancy? And you don't know anything about what's been said, but you're reacting. You're wanting to react, and you're wanting to like use impressionistically what you've just gathered and what you think is going on, and you're like, oh, I'm angry about all this now. I've just learned about it. But kids, you'll drive for an hour and they don't understand a thing they've seen out the window for an hour. And they're fine with that. They're like, I don't know what any of those signs said. I don't know where we started. I don't know where we are. But I'm going to go where I'm told right now because we're getting out of the car. And it's just their ego isn't threatened by that because it's their whole day. Whereas adults are like, no, you're not like, help me. Like I can get all this. I can understand all of it. And kids know that they can't. And all day they're not. And so,
there's like an aesthetic and an emotional experience that drive too. Like they had an experience there that was like valid and interesting and complex that had nothing to do with understanding the references that they were going past.
I was like a huge, Saturday Night Live fan when I was a kid, and I didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
Right.
I didn't even know Bob Dole was a real person.
Right.
I just thought he was a character on SNL, and it didn't really matter.
I was watching that.
Yeah.
I was watching that. I was too. I watched a ton of Saturday Night Live, especially like I was watching the old stuff that they reran on Comedy Central, and I remember like I came across my transom recently, that one, like the Ronald Reagan sketch where he's like so sweet in the Oval Office, and then immediately as soon as like the Girl Scouts leave, like all the guys come in and he puts down this map and he starts running the Iran-Contra scheme, like very like minute detail, and they just vacillate between these. I had no idea what Iran-Contra was, like what Ronald Reagan's like like public personality was versus like what it would be funny if he actually was like. And I thought that sketch was the funniest thing. Part of it is just like because this guy was just like toggling between these two selves, but then also you start to be able to like reverse engineer the world from jokes told about it or stories told about it. You do start to think like, okay, like we must think this guy is nice, but we also think maybe he's a Machiavellian mastermind too. Like you get that just from the sketch, just from the story that's told.
And it's also
Yeah,
rhythmic,
yeah.
right? Like has nothing like the same joke told well or told badly. Kids are really attuned to that like almost right away, which is super interesting that like we're almost born with an innate appreciation for rhythm and timing in a joke being told or a story being told, where it doesn't have much to do with the facts on the ground, but if you drop something at the right moment musically or poetically, like you were
Yes.
talking about,
Mhm.
those relationships are innate. And it's so fun to sort of polish that part without even really knowing if you've exposed the right information of the story, but you're like, but this feels really good to drop it right here. And you listen to the audience like react to that. And my son, will you watch him laugh at a joke, like a Chuck Jones joke, even like a Bugs Bunny one, where they don't quite understand if they're very, very little, they don't quite understand, half the jokes or like the dialogue of it. But those guys were such masters of timing and the beat between expressions and stuff. And they're laughing at what's being intended to be funny. They aren't laughing at some weird kid misunderstanding of the joke. They're laughing at the assassin like precision timing of that frame that drops at the right moment. And there's like, that was really funny. He changed his eyeball and I laughed so hard because of the split second timing of that. And that's valid. That's a real thing that they're laughing at. It's not some, isn't that cute? You thought that was funny, but you don't really get it. That's the joke. And they know it. They know it from the start. And we can do that in picture books too, where you're like, you listen to them laugh at certain parts and you're like, yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I was trying to make you laugh at.
There's like this connoisseur's model of like appreciating art, right? Which is just about like you attain these things through years of study, the ability to like to understand beauty and to interpret an artwork, right? But actually, I think the thing that we accumulate as we grow up, we accumulate references. And so art that is referential, we can understand those references, and kids don't have those references. But many of the other things that it takes, appreciating like the beauty of language and pattern, sensitivity to aesthetics, the comfort with the unsaid or with ambiguity. These are things that we develop very early in childhood, and in fact, I think a lot of adults lose them. These are things that kids are better at. They're also essential to appreciating those artworks. So like the person who can keep that alive or reawaken those qualities through study, that is not new. That is something that we do as humans and that kids do extremely well. It's just when you see a kid not get a joke because they don't have the reference, you figure that they can't understand how a joke works.
Hi, we hope you're enjoying this episode of The Mother of It All with authors Mac Barnett and Jon Klassen. If you like what you're hearing, follow us on Substack and you'll get every episode in your inbox, as well as bonus episodes and posts and a chance to chat with the Mother of It All community. Go to motherofitall.substack.com and subscribe now. Or if you're a commitment phobe, just keep it casual and follow, rate, and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you kindly. Now back to our episode.
So Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote Goodnight Moon, she was a poet. She that was her plan. She wanted to be, she was very excited about the modernist movement. She wanted to write poetry. She moved to New York after college and she couldn't make money as a poet. So she started training at the Bank Street School of Education, which was an experimental lab school that trained teachers in New York. And if you read her evaluations, her student evaluations, like everybody agreed that Margaret Wise Brown was probably going to make a terrible teacher. They would be like, she is flighty, she's distractible, she's way more concerned with like the individual rights of a student than she is in like maintaining the social environment of our class.
Yeah, that was my problem too as a teacher.
And she doesn't like to discipline because she can see even like the biggest troublemaker's point of view, and a lot of these things that were making her an ineffective classroom teacher in the late 30s were the things that made her a great author of books for children. And in fact, like the evaluations always note that too. They'd be like, it was like, even given all of these terrible mistakes that she was making, I will say, like, she made an incredible contribution to our little society. And they would talk about her holding court with like 15, 20, 30 students and entertaining them for hours with stories that she was making up and plays that she was putting on with them. And you really see that it was like at Bank Street that she discovered that she didn't want to teach kids, but that she wanted to write stories for them. And it also exposes, like, again, this tension between those two goals, between children's literature and children's education, that it's complementary, that we are both sort of, in the largest sense, engaged in the same project. We want the best for kids, but we have very different ideas about what our jobs are and how to get them there. But she wrote this essay called Writing for 5-Year-Olds. And it was about, it was pegged to the developmental milestones a kid is going through from age 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and saying why this was making them great readers, great appreciators of art. And she does talk about kids' sensitivity to language, their obsession with their own subjectivity, but their love of their little selves, but also their ability to start to understand others. She talks about their love of pattern, like the incongruity of their sense of humor, and she calls it the age of rhyme and reason. And then she says, there's this heartbreaking sentence that she says something like, "Here certainly is a keenness that will be displaced or blunted later."
Yeah.
And
that is sad.
Yeah.
I've been blunted. My keenness has been blunted. Actually, reading picture books is a place, I think, where it starts to come back.
Yeah. I think that it's actually like that's a remarkable thing, right? Like, here she's saying, like, they're actually better at this than we are. That like, as time goes on, this ability to appreciate poetry and art and storytelling, it's going to be blunted. How do we reawaken that? And her other conclusion, after she lists all this stuff, she says, "Here then is a difficult age to write for." And
right, everyone thinks they can write a children's book, like Paris Hilton and stuff, and it's so, just because it's short doesn't mean it's easy.
That's right.
Jon, you have this quote from that piece too that I just pulled out that I thought was so well said. That you said, you might remember this verbatim, but I'm gonna do it for you. You said, "For kids, the world could still be a lot of things," which is actually the more correct way to think. When you're writing for kids as an adult, a lot of the joy in it is that you're spending time with a group who still understand and believe that almost anything, any world, is possible.
Yeah, and not even like in an aspirational way where we're going to change the world, but they're still trying to figure out what world we're actually like currently in. And like, there are so many different ways that could be revealed to them. And so they're wondering where we even are.
Well, I think that maybe that's one of the positive versions of, maybe not writing with adults as the main goal in mind, but kind of, giving some joy to adults in your book. Like, I'm thinking about one of my favorite children's books, picture books, The Elephant and the Bad Baby, where there's this refrain, there's this bad baby gets picked up by an elephant. There's no context for it, which is fine. I think adults often want there to be context, and a good author can just kind of start out with a premise right away, and kids accept it. So the premise is that there's a bad baby and he's riding an elephant and he's going around town and stealing things from all of these vendors and then getting back on the elephant, and the vendors, one-on-one, one by one, are chasing after him. And at the end, they all go back to the bad baby's house and the mom makes them all pancakes, and they get over it. But there's this refrain, rumpeta, 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 all down the road. And it is like, the joy of reading it is that saying that rumpeta, 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 and the repetition, like you said, kind of also supports the premise. You know, it's like, well, if we just kind of repeat this enough, it just makes sense that there's this baby is getting this elephant reluctantly to steal an apple for it, and then they make someone mad and they move on. But I'm thinking too about the visual aspect, and Jon, maybe you can speak to this. You were an illustrator first, right? Before you started.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you were always shaping books when you were illustrating them, but before you started writing. So how do good picture books use illustrations?
I like looking at photography a lot, and I never really understand, I don't take a lot of pictures. I don't know much about photography technically, but so much of photography has to do with your position relative to an objective object, right? And that's a lot of what illustration is too, is that the text is an objective object. It's sitting out there already. It's the gas station that you're going to take a walk around as a photographer 15 different ways and see what the most interesting angle is, but it's not moving itself. And you as the illustrator are sort of like that, where you're like, what's the most interesting angle on this particular subject that has no personality maybe of its own, or maybe that's the whole point of it, or whatever personality it has is almost none of my business again. I'm here to bring my angle to this and to stand relative to the light and relative to the shape and the negative space behind it. All that stuff is like, what are the opportunities here as far as I'm concerned? Because this thing isn't moving. It can't. That's sort of the fun of it, is that like, yeah, you can stand, there's 1,000 different great photographs around that gas station, but what's yours? What's the best one? And you just try and grab it.
I think also like one, Jon, you kept saying, I don't know why I'm saying this is just fun for kids, but one thing that's interesting about a picture book too is that the pictures really do belong to the kids. Like the adult who's reading the story out loud is usually so focused on that job, right? Because as a grown-up reading a picture book, you're kind of the audience, but you're also the most important performer of this thing. You are an artist. You are choosing voices. You are turning the pages. You are the storyteller. And usually when you're reading a picture book out loud, you're just trying so hard not to screw up the words because it's very embarrassing to read things wrong in front of kids. You're trying to get it right, do things right. And meanwhile, as you are trying to put on this performance, the kids are letting the words wash over them, but they are noticing things in those pictures. You don't have a lot of time to linger as the adult who's trying to manage the pace of this story to look at the illustrations. So kids are getting information from two different places. They're hearing what you say, these words, and these words that are usually coming from an adult voice. And then they're looking at the world of the pictures, and reconciling these two things. And I think that I do think that a lot of the time in the books that Jon and I make, the words do kind of belong to the world of adults. And that Jon is sort of like, he's the ally of the kids. He's making these pictures that is like, hey, look at this. The words don't know anything. The words aren't describing the world. This adult doesn't know what they're talking about. Look what's right in front of you, and nobody even notices, but you see it. And that's a really fun dynamic.
Like a wink.
Yeah.
We've been dealing with images for a lot longer than we've been dealing with words, written or spoken. And there is this deep down, healthy, correct mistrust of the capacity of words to grab our whole experience. And kids are still back there when images and these dreamy sort of half messages are the truth. And they know that, and it completely is valid for them. It's everything they've needed so far. And here we are telling them, well, you haven't quite got the whole thing because we've got these weird symbols over here that are going to fix this all up. And they're like, but I'm going through it all. And they're like, no, maybe you haven't learned to read yet. And then here comes these clunky words to say a thing, and they're like, but it's not even true. They're not even right. And there's just this validation of their experience so far in the pictures, knowing what the words don't know. They're like, I don't think these things are quite right. And even if we talk about messages and things you want to teach kids, I think Mac and I both have a big belief in like teaching them to read critically, to be like, yeah, most things you're going to read in your life don't quite know what's going on, especially the authoritative sounding ones. So read carefully. And like, if we have any sort of thing to have the kids walk away with, even if the story is just meant to be fun, the mechanic of that, having taught them to be like, don't quite trust it, is all good for us. That's just right.
It's a life skill to not always like kind of be so explicit.
Yeah.
straightforward.
Or just that they
Yeah.
can be completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that this person who is in charge of you might be wrong too, right? And that's like that is sort of the amazing thing about picture books and children's literature generally, is like childhood is it's so hierarchical, right? Like your relationship with adults, almost every time you come in contact with an adult, that adult has authority over you. That adult is in charge of you. And for good reason. Like adults help kids in all kinds of ways. Like kids can't use a stove at a young age. They should.
They won't.
Well, my little
kids
cleaner.
Would like to.
You guys don't let your
Yeah.
kids use stoves? Okay.
There are good reasons that adults have authority over kids, but we get so used to that dynamic, and it is so flattering to us as adults, that dynamic, that we think that maybe it's the only one that can exist. And I think children's literature does tend to poke at those hierarchies. One, just because like here is a place where kids and adults are meeting as equals. They are both audiences of a story. Like we said, here is a place where kids may be more adept at figuring out what's going on in the story than the adults who are reading alongside them. And also here is this thing that fundamentally in the picture book is telling you to mistrust the authority of words, of the text.
Well, this is reminding me so much of our conversation with Eloise Rickman about, children's rights. And some people parent with that in mind, that they are human beings with human rights as much as adults, and we have to keep them safe. But that doesn't, Eloise Rickman's whole thing is to question the power dynamic where you assume that you are in control. And I think, and have power over them all the time from 0 to 18. And
it brings up a live debate too about what they're ready to hear, right? Like a lot of children's books want to tackle really big issues that are more referential and circumstantial than necessary. Like how do you begin to tell someone about a historical thing when they don't have any context for that versus like, well, you said kids were valid people. Shouldn't they be able to hear everything? You're like, well, yeah, but this is just a result of 100 years of mistakes. This isn't something that like is objectively knowable. It's really hard to tease out the differences there. And then you really appreciate people who can do that well and can do it universally and begin to explain really tricky situations in a very distilled, proper way. It's a live, active place to discuss these things and to get a handle on what we think of kids, but what we think of the issues just generally. It's a very interesting field for all of that. And or it can be anyway.
I was wondering if you could give an example of a book that you feel like tackles a heavy subject that adults want kids to kind of be processing in a successful way. I think that a lot of the parents me and my husband talk about this a lot. We understand that, you want to write books. We want to talk to our kids about gender. We want to talk to them about bullying, right? And a lot of those books do what you're talking about, which is like teaching kids a lesson from an adult lens. And it's hard to find ones that that show it, holding both in mind that kids are sophisticated and they can handle difficult concepts, but understanding where the entry point is for kids with that, right?
Well, I think that this too is, I was going to say, I think this is where you get a little bit into how many different genres the picture book encompasses, right? Because like, if we're trying to understand bullying in schools, right, we will probably read nonfiction, journalism theory, educational theory about bullying. And it will describe the problem, maybe try to get at some causes and prescribe some remedies. There are picture books that basically do the same thing, but that's not fiction about bullying, right?
Right.
So that is a different job. And so lesson-driven books, explanatory books, informational books, those things should exist for children. And the picture book is fully capable of doing it. But because we're so ready to teach kids, that is the most comfortable place for adults to be, we sometimes think that that is what all children's books should do, that that is what picture books do. And the first thing to get crowded out is art fiction for kids. So if we want to be talking about bullying, it's gonna be like the rules of narrative, of art, of fiction, and not prescriptive. It's not because we don't think that's valid. I just don't think I don't have the prescriptions. I just have a bunch of like very raw, emotional, unprocessed.
Well, most of your books actually are kind of about bullying, Mac, now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a lot of experiences with bullies. And I will tell you, like, here's a case where like also every adult seminar where they'd be like, you know what, if it happens, just tell an adult. And I was like, okay, great. The principal said, just tell the teacher. So I told my teacher, and then the teacher calls Nate's mom. And then the next day, Nate bullies me even harder because I told the teacher, this isn't working. This stuff isn't working. And that is what I want to write about. That's what I want to write about.
Yeah. That second day, that second beat, or even the loss of, or even like, I think I would even like, there's interest in even stopping short of that, of like the brevity of picture books, or like the opportunities of short fiction versus something longer that you have where you might need to resolve something, or because you just have the time and the space to do it. We can get out in 28 pages. Sometimes 28 pages is enough to just describe bullying as a phenomenon, and then you're out. If you validated the existence of it, to be like, yeah, they're out there, it does happen, that might be enough to justify a book. And it might be cathartic enough to just read about someone else going through it, or that they exist at all. Because like some kids are like, this is happening? Like, is this supposed to happen? And you're like, here's a book about it happening. And we don't know. Everyone's still kind of out on what to do about it when it does happen. But like, here it is illustrated in a very distilled way to kind of say that, yeah, it does. It's a phenomenon. And like, even just the description of that can be very, very interesting. And you're out. You don't have to be like, and that's why you always tell your mom, you're like, that page doesn't exist. You'd be like, yeah, sometimes this guy's going to come and bash you up against the fence. And that's a bad day. And like, that's a book.
Valid. Yeah. Like I was reading last night the Marginalian, the newsletter where she, So she was reflecting on 18 years of it. And she brought up this James Baldwin quote that is, you think your pain and heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. And I was thinking about like why we read as adults and as children and what they are getting, and just reflecting an experience back to them. Not with any sort of prescriptive thing, but just saying like that did happen. Things
you recommended
right?
a book to me once. You recommended to me, Mac, Judith Viorst, who Miranda's a big fan of. Her book "I'll Fix Anthony" about sibling rivalry.
That's a good example of this.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between
that book do that. The book that I want to write about how you should not be a dick to your sister. So I can have a better home life.
That book is such a great example of like energy release without Anthony actually getting any narrative comeuppance, right? Because I think that a really basic read of how to tackle this would be like, well, but the bully has to pay. Like narratively, there's got to be a consequence, and that's not the same thing as providing the reader with a release of some sort of energy that you've built up. That book has a way of like spit valving what you need to get out of your system without actually solving the problem at all. It just, you feel better after having read it, and nothing bad has actually happened to Anthony to punish him for what he's done. And it's just
Judith
this
Viorst
amazing
is
trick.
Incredible that way. Like she was really interested in bibliotherapy, right? Which was like this idea that children's books can have a therapeutic value that helps kids solve problems, which I will say like intellectually has almost zero interest for me whatsoever. But I think Judith Viorst is one of the greats because she also just practices great fiction writing. And I think, her path to doing that is not prescriptive. She never sells out on her endings. Her endings are never tidy. Things are never fixed. And I think she would probably say, well, that is the therapeutic value. And for me, I'm like, no, that is like honest, authentic storytelling. That's good fiction.
Yes, and Mac. Yes,
I agree.
And.
I think we've probably just taken two paths to the same place. But I'll Fix Anthony is incredible. It's like it starts off with this litany. This little kid describes all the ways that his older brother is terrible. And his older brother is terrible, does these awful things to him. And then it's illustrated by Arnold Lobel. Suddenly, it zooms in on this character. Everything has been
Frog
on this
and Toad. Frog and
background.
Toad.
Yeah,
Arnold
yeah,
Lobel.
yeah.
And I want to say quickly, Judith, for people who don't know this book, like her most famous is Alexander in the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, which I think probably all of us, everybody knows.
And it should be said, too, that Alexander is the narrator of this book because Alexander is the name of one of her sons and Anthony is the name of another one of her sons. So it then zooms in on this kid, and he is just like he's just in this little square, and it's like, and he's been like the sweetest, most plaintive guy, and then he has this like really evil expression, and he goes, "When I'm 6, I'll fix Anthony." And then he just describes all of the terrible things he's going to do to Anthony when he's 6 and how the power will completely flip. And Anthony is still much bigger than him, but like 6 in his mind, he's like, finally, I'm 6. He doesn't realize that Anthony will also have aged. He is still way smaller than Anthony, and he just lords his authority over Anthony. And then it ends with like that reverie being broken. Anthony is still terrible. His mom is still ineffective in helping. And he just kind of gives us one look back to the reader. And he's like, when I'm 6, I'll fix Anthony. And that's the end. And it's so great. It is so authentic to that experience and validating to revenge. And of course, like Judith Viorst has achieved her bibliotherapeutic goals, but she's also written like the great revenge picture book,
right? Which adults are uncomfortable with,
super
right?
Oh yeah,
it's
uncomfortable. It breaks my the part that breaks my heart about that book though is even the nuance inside the mechanic of it. Where there's one page I keep thinking about where I think he says like, when I'm 6, my grandpa will take me to the movies and get me popcorn. And we'll leave Anthony at home or something like that. But he goes, and I won't even share any popcorn with Anthony unless I want to. And unless I want to, that happens that idea happens a couple different ways where you're like, he still loves Anthony. He's going to bring popcorn home, even in this outside fantasy of like how great this is going to be to like beat the crap out of Anthony. He's still like, I should bring him some popcorn home for Anthony. It's just popcorn. Like, oh no, oh God. Like you're just like, I just can't take it. Those pages, those cracks of like affection.
It's not being done to appease this adult, vision.
No. It's because he's living with the character of like what a younger brother actually feels like with his older brother. Is like there is nothing you can do to break your younger brother's complete love for you. And like this book is about all of it at once. Yes. Right.
Actually, I think Mac, a lot of your books, like the Terrible 2 series, which is really, really perfect chapter books. They, the love of, for the bully is, I think, it's not from an adult perspective of like, then they make up and there's like redemption. It's just kind of showing the humanity and also how obsessed you can be with the relationship that you get, with your tormentors, which is very real for kids.
So we have this Substack that we've started, which is worth mentioning, called Looking at Picture Books. And the first book we decided to look at in the blog was Where the Wild Things Are, just because there is so much, partly because there is so much to talk about on that note, where the relationship between words and text is very interesting in that. One of the points we got most excited about was this journey that Max takes into this Wild Things land from his bedroom and then back again. What you're never quite sure of in the book is whether this has happened or not. And, I think it's the quick read of it and the sort of the mainstream one is that this all happened in Max's head. And it was this thing that he needed to do therapeutically in his head to get through this mood he was in and to kind of release whatever anger he had. And he comes home and it's all over and his mom has left him dinner. But there's lots of visual clues in the book to suggest that this actually really did happen. And Sendak's comfort with that thing we were talking about, where like this sort of middle space that Sendak is good at living in and that kids are also living in all the time, is like, it's real and it's not. This is a symbolic story, but it absolutely happened in the universe of this book. And why not? Because we're making a book for you. And like, we don't have to say that it was just, a symbol of something. It happened.
Yeah, like I think the biggest one, just to like tie it down to something, is that if you look out the window, on the night Max leaves, and then when he returns, the moon is in a different phase. And
he was gone for weeks.
Yeah,
at least.
Like the text doesn't say that, and as Jon said, like a lot of the excitement, like the most sensitive readings, the most laudatory readings of that book are this great bit of psychoanalytic, like Freudian currents running through children's literature, and saying like, look, this movement that was so important to adult literature has finally reached kids, and gets bogged down in also like the power of storytelling, that like Max told himself a story that helped him process his emotions that night, and adults are like kind of fall into that trap because they don't see what kids will notice, which is like, that's a different moon. He was really gone. He was away from home, and Sendak is giving you both things. It is of course a very psychological book, but like as adults get so excited, Sendak does that little wink for the kid at the end, and he's like, dude,
it really happened.
Gone.
He was gone. Yeah,
those monsters are real. He was in charge of them, and he has been away from his mom for weeks.
Yes. How many hot dinners has she brought up here?
Yeah. I bet she feels so bad that she yelled at you.
How old is she now? How gray is her hair? Like all of that. Yeah.
We don't know.
Like,
we don't see her.
You don't have
goes back
time.
To the way that you were talking about how the best authors and illustrators think about adults, and kind of validate children's relationships with adults, which is often kind of about power. People talk about how like in a Roald Dahl book, like or Roald Dahl, I think has a quote, maybe, about like the parent should either be dead or evil. And then in a lot of the best picture books, we don't really see the parents.
Right.
They're kind of off screen. I think one where the parents are highly involved and I like it would probably be the Francis books.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like, it's certainly true that like adults have wonderful and nurturing and like fruitful relationships with kids, and that's possible, and actually really, yeah, it is a truth about the world, and that truth is reflected in so much of children's literature, but it's also reflected all over childhood. A truth that kids know very well that adults don't like to talk about is that there are some adults who are in charge of kids who have no business being in charge of kids, who are sadistic or incompetent, who are careless. And we don't like to acknowledge that. And kids' books is a place where that happens. And it's one of the only places that happens. So if it feels like you hear that complaint all the time, like, why are all the adults in kids' books buffoons or cruel? And it's because there are some adults who are cruel and who are buffoons, and we never admit it. So here finally is the one release valve we've found to say, like, hey, sometimes this happens. So yeah, are they overrepresented in children's literature? Yes, but they are woefully underrepresented in all other aspects of a kid's life. We don't acknowledge it.
Right. Get over it, parents.
Yeah, get over it.
I know, we get so offended. We're like, why are Matilda's parents so mean?
Can't they be cool like me? And
And then I'm like,
give them a kiss.
Then I'm like, brush your teeth. And like, bathe every day for some reason. Actually, I don't have that standard, but a lot of parents do, and it's wild. Well, I was wondering about your favorite children's books. I had, this desert island setup of like the American Librarians Association like banishes you to a desert island. You can only take 3 picture books with you. What do you take? But I also like, this take on it. Miranda was suggesting of kind of like, what are the picture books that you go to when you need inspiration?
Yeah.
So you can take either of those prompts.
Mac, I don't know. I'm not sure we ever talked about that, but I have this habit I've developed this habit of if I do have a picture book in mind that's especially inspirational, I kind of make a habit of leaving it on the shelf, but trying to remember as hard as I can what the pages were. And I usually have bent them in that process. Even if it's only been a couple months since I've seen it, you're off a little bit, right? You don't have that specific sharp memory. At least I don't. And so by the time I've copied my memory of the thing, it's so off already that no one's going to accuse me in a court of law about, ripping it off, because I've already bent it to my will in my memory. And so I don't sit there with them open, but I go to Remy Charlap's work a lot these days, and for a while, fortunately. But a couple of those, he just has this freedom and this looseness and this access to childhood that I really admire. And just the shape of his general deal is something I really look at a lot.
I'm not familiar with him.
There's a bunch to say about him. He did some Margaret Wise Brown text. That's correct, right, Mac? He did do some stuff with her, and he did some Ruth Krauss books as well. And just he was an illustrator for people, but he was a dance instructor. He was a big neat, like when people do have had his work when they were kids, it seems to have like marked them especially like deeply. It's a very specific guy, and he wasn't about technical achievement in these things. He was an amazing designer, but his way of drawing was very simple and very childlike. And even his playfulness with a concept of what a book was really loose and really great. He seems to be like, he was one of those guys who you could tell just was deeply interested in childhood and remembered his own and wanted to sit in that.
There's a guy, Donald Cruz.
I love Donald Cruz. The train.
Freight Train.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He also has these books. There's one, Freight Train works like this too. Parade, which is about a parade, A Night at the Fair, which is about going to a carnival. He'll find these, you could say like nonfiction moments. He's just describing something, right? He's just describing the cars of a train and then the train pulling away. Parade just kind of describes in beautiful, careful language the progression of a parade, but he finds the emotional shape to the thing that already exists, so that like he will just say like, here's the train and it's pulling away, and like you'll start crying at the end of the book. But he hasn't done anything but just describe the world, but he uses like language very carefully so that you can kind of use it as a trapdoor into all kinds of experience. And he's amazing at that.
To me, like a beautiful children's book is one that will, in the frantic bedtime moment, like slow me down. Like the book brings me to this moment with my kid. A lot of times bedtime is, if you're working and your kid's gone all day, I mean, this is like your only time that you sit still with your kid and you go into their world. And it might be the only time you really share a world together. And the book can really bring you in. And, no offense, but like a Daniel Tiger book doesn't really, I sleepwalk through those.
Are those written by AI? Like, are the Paw Patrol, are all the IP books written by a computer? I just want to set this straight. And if you can't answer it out loud, just touch your noses if it's a yes.
You know what? They've read that way for years before we've had AI. So sadly, I think no. It's so weird. Yeah. People talk a lot about...
Are those the people that trained AI? The people who were writing,
that's probably
we all trained AI, Sarah. We all participated in that.
I think that...
Did you guys get your check? I got my check yesterday for training AI.
Every Google search for the last 10 years.
I think that, like, there's like a lot... It feels like every 6 months there's an essay about celebrity picture books, which are bad. And the sad thing about them is that, again, children's books are like books generally. There's instructional books. There's a lot of self-help sold for adults in Barnes & Noble. There's a lot of books for kids that is basically self-help. There's literary fiction. There are, just as like politicians who are running for office writes like a kind of a book full of platitudes to introduce themselves in their campaign, they will often write a children's book that does the same thing. It mirrors it so closely. And just as there are books that, are anywhere from like really bad to sometimes surprisingly good by celebrities for adults, and that happens for kids too. I think the sad thing is that like part of the bargain that you make with the adult who buys the book is like, this is going to be kind of fun because the celebrity wrote this book or told it to a ghostwriter. You get to participate in that emotional experience you have with the celebrity when you read the book. But the kids who are hearing these bad picture books have no emotional experience with these celebrities. The adults do. The adult who buys the book does.
My kids don't know who Kourtney Kardashian is yet. So,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's not meaningful to them.
clock
So
is
even when
ticking.
we're reading something bad by a Kardashian, we're like, this is fun. I'm in the Kardashian universe. That's not the case for kids. That is kind of the case. That is the case for the Daniel Tiger book,
Right,
though.
they don't give
Like
a shit.
the Daniel
Yeah,
Tiger book is
that's
kind of
their
the
Kardashian.
celebrity. Yeah, it's like, hey, maybe this isn't like the most like soul nourishing thing in the world, but Daniel Tiger is involved in this. He's on my TV.
Do you think are there any ways that how you view your work and children's books have changed since you've become fathers?
I think that this goes back to maybe some of that talk about hierarchy. That I do think like a lot of my like role as Father Mac does involve like setting up some rules and structures. I think that is part of what I'm giving my son, and that is in tension with my job when I am setting out to write a picture book. And so in some ways, like my job as an author of picture books is to make my job as a dad like a little bit more of a pain in the ass. Like that, and that's right and good. We want lots of perspectives in our kids' lives. And so they're two very different jobs, and there's so much overlap between them, but there are these sort of different obligations that I believe are both important, and I feel lucky that I get to do both. I think that's cool about
Mac's a
picture
very
books generally.
particular creature that way, though. He is excellent with kids and happens to be an excellent author, and those two things are different. And I think that it's easy to think that they should go together because he's so good at both of them. But he's always been good at both of them before having kids and after.
Did you work with kids, John, before you
No.
were
No.
writing?
I always think of, there's this one scene, it's a random reference, but I always think of that one scene in Office Space where they meet, the guys who come in to evaluate the office meet Michael Bolton. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, you must especially love Michael Bolton having the same name as him is all. And like, he's like, right, yes, of course. And that's always how I felt when they were like, you must be especially great with kids writing books for them and all. And it's just like, right. Why? Like, you don't, they are
It's
two
not the
separate
same.
things. And I think like I have my way of relating to kids, and I think I've gotten a chance to watch Mac do it and sort of find my own way of doing it too. But they're very different. And there's lots of, like, they assume that you are in some weird way that you're good on the ground with kids when you do this. You're interested in children, but not necessarily. It's not the skill that you've got. Those are
Right.
two separate things too. I think that
I'm interested in hip hop, but I don't.
yeah.
I'm not going to shows. Well, I'm
Right,
old,
right.
But
I think with this thing, I don't know, when we first, because we had kids around the same time, and I think that you're sort of positioned to not wanting to say that it changes things, because we know a lot of people who don't have kids who are great at this, and so it doesn't
Yeah.
seem to do the thing.
Yeah.
And also people who, before we had kids, people coming up to me, it's like, you must have kids, you write children's books, and you're like, well, what? And that's a very strange thing to feel also. But then after you had kids, we've been making books for kids for a long time before we had kids, and so our way into that wasn't because we had kids we were thinking about or pointing these things at. And so after you have them, there's almost an impulse to be like, well, no, it's not about, like, being a father hasn't changed this thing. I think it starts to creep in ways that you didn't expect or would have guessed at. For me, anyway, it's introduces
Like
you to
what?
form. Well, like, I didn't know about board books until we had our second one, and like the original board book, like the 12-page Sandra Boynton or Taro Gomi ones, and that just by virtue of having babies around, those things come into your house, and you're like, this is a whole different form.
yeah.
But then also there's this extra thing that I've been noticing. I've been working on board books, and Mac and I have been working on board books too.
Oh.
And that form in particular, speaking about reading kids or kids reading to themselves, with the picture book, it's like, well, is this going to be with the kid on his own, or is this going to be read to out loud? And you're never really sure. But with a board book, at least ideally, you're pretty sure it's going to be read to even a pre-verbal audience. And something, I'm not sure if it changes the writing, although I think it actually kind of does, is the knowledge that you are giving a parent or a guardian or whoever it is reading to this child, words to say to a baby who can't necessarily talk. And when I became a dad, everyone would tell you, talk to your baby, take them around the house, talk to them about your day. What are you doing? Are you making the sandwich? Talk to them about the sandwich. Get them used to your voice and tell them what's going on, even if they can't talk back. And I wasn't good at it. And I remember it not coming naturally. And I've seen parents who are good at it, and it's amazing to watch. And you're like, how come I can't do this? How come I can't think of things to say to my kid? And you're like, am I bad at this? Is this a weird limp that I've got? And for some people like that, you are giving them words to say to their kid that they don't have to think about. You're giving them words that they're talking to their kid, and you're giving them the words to say. And it might be one of the only times of the day that they're able to do this naturally, or at least, in a stream of words. And that's big. And then plus that, there's no coincidence then that like books that are literally called I Love You, or like I love you so much, or like that kind of thing. It feels good to say that to your kid.
Well, I'm thinking too about my own experience, like with especially my second, like I was not in a good place for the first like 5 months, 6 months postpartum. And I was with my kids a lot, and I was really tired. And I often felt, I think this is maybe relatively common with the second child, like I just didn't have a lot for her. I was really busy with her older brother, and it was, there's just a lot going on. And so when I did have a minute to like read her a book, it was so, and it was also something I could do sitting still with a baby. You're like, can we sit? And she liked to turn the pages. Like it's also like a playful, so you don't read it in order even necessarily. You might be kind of bouncing through the book. And but it's like reading some of those sentimental things sometimes, like together,
it's given me more patience for those, where before I think I would have been like, oh, come on, you guys. But like now I'm like, oh, okay, that's why that works. And it's not, I still don't necessarily want to make them, but I began to understand them more. Yeah.
And they soothed me. Like they soothed me in a very hard time. As much, whatever they were doing for her, they helped me calm down. So even though, I'm so grateful for those books. And I think a lot of people, I was talking to other parents on the playground the other day about growing out of the board book time. And they're so meaningful to you. Yeah. The stack of books.
I've saved a lot. I can't get rid of them.
Huge. There's no easy way to store them.
And that's a humbling thing too, is that people will bring you the books, and like that's true too. Mac and I have both been through that since having kids, is that you have parents who come up to you with the book that you wrote, and that was their kids that was one of the first books they had or something, and they're like, would you please sign this book? And it's not really about how good the book is or what a good job you did, but what this artifact means to them, and that you were a part of it. You happen to be the book maybe that they were given or something, but it still does mean something to you, that like you made that artifact. You happen to be the person that they invested this time in. This thing will always mean those years to them. And I don't, you can guess at that, but then now we we understand now. We're like, yeah, okay. It's like, and again, you can't completely own it, because it's like, that could have been any number of books and you just happen to have ours, but it's nice that it's ours.
Such a pleasure to talk to both of you. We thank you for just like, personally as a parent, the like hours and hours of joy and kind of intrigue that I've had enjoying your books with my children is, like you said, Jon, when people come up to you, it's like, it means a lot sentimentally, but it's also, it's so interesting creatively to look at what you do, and to try to figure out, it's nothing I could do, right? Like to try to figure out how did that happen? And it's a delight to talk to you. So we're really grateful for you for coming on. We encourage everybody to go check out your Substack, Looking at Picture Books, to grab a copy of How Does Santa Go Down the Chimney, and to just pay attention to all the wonderful things you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was great.
Thanks for listening to The Mother of It All. And like my mom always said, the world could still be a lot of things. The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Knox Media with music from It's Electric. If you liked this episode, why not send it to a friend right now? Go on, we'll wait.
You can follow us on Substack at themotherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox and connect you with the Mother of It All listener community. Plus, become a paid subscriber and get a hot off the presses Mother of It All canvas tote. We're also on Instagram at The Mother of It All, and you can email us anytime with ideas or feedback at motherculturepod@gmail.com.